Do supply chain organizations often overlook user experience design when implementing software?
Thumbs up.
Do supply chain organizations often underestimate the time and resource needed for software adoption?
Thumbs down.
Interesting. Have you ever felt you were living the reality of the movie Groundhog Day based software implementation?
Thumbs up.
I appreciate your honesty. Welcome to the Supply Chain Tech Podcast with Roamby. Scott Mears here, Senior Marketing Manager at Roamby and your host. We thank you for joining us today. In this episode, we speak with Matt Palackdharry. Matt is the Chief Strategy Officer at Apty. We first dissect the unique challenges of software adoption in supply chain. We then identify strategies for driving adoption in different geos and with remote employees. Lastly, we outline the top 3 areas for solution providers to drive further adoption. Welcome, Matt. It's great to have you on the episode today.
Thanks, Scott. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you on. You know, it's really good to get someone of your expertise because we can really dive into the tech side, really the detail where, maybe our customers and our target accounts and, the industries out there maybe struggling when it comes to integrating all these innovations. They all now have these innovation hubs and they're looking for the latest tech and they, love all the, the presentations about them. But when it comes to the integration, it can be very complicated if you're not, amongst it. So I'm going to be very interested in picking your brains throughout this episode and interested in what you're going to say today.
Well, I'm looking forward to the topic as well. And certainly the tech landscape is changing by the moment in supply chain, it feels. So I would say I'm deep into it, and even I have troubles keeping up with it at times. So I can only imagine if you're not staring at the changing tech landscape every day, how hard it would be to keep up with the evolution of this market right now.
Yeah, it's crazy fast. But I want to hit with a fun icebreaker first. And, I always like to learn a bit about our guests first. And, I'm going to go into a fictional land. I would like to ask if you could implement a fictional technology from a movie or a TV show into the real world of supply chain operations, which one would you choose and how do you think it would revolutionize the industry?
Yeah, wow. Well, that's a good question. My gut initially goes to Iron Man, actually, and Iron Man is not so much all the weapons on it, but the digital interface that he has inside the mask, where he's monitoring what's happening and all the different components, and when failures happen in one part of the Iron Man suit, you kind of have to readjust in other areas, and the augmented overlays. I would have to go that way because right now there's so many new tech components coming to the space. If you don't have this centralized command center that can control it all, each part by itself isn't really the strength. It's when you bring it all together and have that central command. So I'd probably go with the Iron Man suit.
I love that. I think that's I think that's quite a unique choice, actually. I thought you may have gone other ways, maybe, flying of Superman or maybe freeze from the Incredibles to keep it, sensitive goods cold. But that's an interesting one. I like this, and especially with the Apple Vision coming out, that almost seems like we're getting close to it. So, it might not be too far. It might not be too far.
Absolutely. The augmented reality tech, I think, over the next couple of years is going to be very interesting to see what happens because it's been talked about for some time and it feels like it's just about here. And now with all these technology solutions, I think something's going to happen.
Yeah, it really is. And for me, I would happily jump into more fiction, but we're going to stick to the topic.
Okay.
So we're going to the topic of the really diving into, how, these industries and companies out there can integrate the new innovation. So really first, I want to understand the landscape. Let's get to understand what the landscape is first. So, some of these questions might be a bit meaty, but, we're looking to get, unique perspectives and maybe different information to what, maybe our industries out there are learning from events and associations and other places they're learning from. So in your view at the moment, what would you say are the unique challenges that arise when implementing software solutions in supply chain operations, particularly considering the intricate interdependencies and varying degrees of technological maturity across different segments and supply chain?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start with an area I think we've gotten really strong, and I think that will pull out the areas that we're still weak in. I think that from a pure functionality perspective and what can happen with the different technologies in this space, we're getting extremely strong. If you want lots of choice at your disposal and you want different solutions that can do anything you can really dream from an operational perspective, we can get there. And that's, I think, the really exciting thing about the technology landscape in supply chain right now. But what I will say is that there's two really big barriers that constantly come up in every implementation, really, of any tech in this space. And I would say that the first is data. So every one of these platforms runs on data. You've probably heard the analogies of garbage in, garbage out, or gold in, gold out, right? And so getting the data right has been a challenge in this space for a very long time. And you've seen a lot of organizations do things like set up a supplier portal or buy data from a Dun Bradstreet. Right? And all these things have led to problems that make the center tech component not produce the results you want on the end. Now, in my opinion, I think this is being solved right now with a lot of the generative AI pieces. I think that now with large LLMs, you're able to wade through a lot of data, get the data that you want without doing a bunch of research. So I have a feeling that as we continue down this path, that one will continue to be eliminated. The second is an area that I personally am trying to solve right now, and that's around adoption. We have really great technologies, but you could have hundreds of them, and we don't have times to go learn hundreds of different pieces of technology. You need to know exactly how to use the platform the moment you get into it. And so solving the adoption component is something I think every organization needs to to be thinking about. If you went and you just spent a bunch of money on new technology and then you don't get the return on that technology, it really jeopardizes any of the other recommendations you bring forward as well. But if, on the flip side, if you go and you implement a piece of technology and you get anywhere near the software benefits that you thought at the beginning, you're just going to be able to continue to iterate on top of that and build a really best-in-class procurement tech stack. So those are the two areas right now that I think still have some room to be solved. And then me specifically, I'm focused on the adoption component.
Yeah, it's good to, hear you bring, this up, especially around the adoption. I think, uh, saying a bull in a china shop, they can get attracted to all the shiny items in the shop, and it can be very attractive initially, but that integration piece, or even just the adoption, you're saying the adoption piece, which is much bigger than the integration of in the systems, that can be a much more complex piece. And I think this is a really interesting one you bring up, and one that I hope we dive into further in this episode as well.
Yeah.
So I want to identify the barriers to adoption. So let's dive into this. So what would you say are maybe some often overlooked cultural or organizational barriers that hinder successful software adoption within supply chain operations? And how do you feel companies can address them?
Yeah. Well, I think my opinion on adoption has changed over the years. At the beginning, I thought we just needed to make adoption fun. So I would rush to things like gamification. And I think that's where we certainly saw some cultural aspects get in the way of gamification. You would have the younger generation, for example, really into the gamification. They've, lived their life on video games being brought up and then trying to get new achievement milestones. And the older generation hasn't, right? And so the gamification did nothing for them. And as I've continued to think about the adoption problem, I think I've realized that the largest piece of the adoption problem, in my opinion at least, is it's really a core learning problem. And it's how do we learn most effectively? And when I think about how most organizations go about teaching people how to learn new systems, if you're installing new systems, you're probably installing several a year at least to teach everybody how to use those. How do you do that the most effectively? I think people want to use the new software. They see the functionality coming out of it, but we need to make it as easy as possible. And most organizations have rushed to traditional learning tactics. They've gone through and they've stood up a learning management system and put in many different courses, or they've written how-to guides. And all those things are fine. But I think now that we know more effective ways to learn, one of the easiest ways to get people to truly learn software better is to have something in line where you can ask a question. We have natural curiosity as humans, where I can ask a question and get the answer immediately. And when I just follow that simple process, then people will be able to learn more effectively. If you get into a traditional classroom setting, for example, and you have a question, and that question isn't answered until 3 hours later, everything that happened between the time that you had that question and that question was answered, you're not going to remember because none of it was taken in context of what was actually getting in the way of you at that moment. And so I think one of the real promising things that's coming up, especially some of the things that we're trying to build in digital adoption, is exactly that, where if I can come on screen and I have, say, an AI assistant with me at any time, and I can ask a question and it will guide me to whatever platform I need to do, use the platform within the processes, read the procedures that the organization wants me to follow, and then show me on screen. Well, once I do that a couple of times, I won't ever need to do it again. But with so many platforms, I think the immersive learning experience is going to be a better way to go than the traditional classroom setup, because I just don't think that people have the time to go through the deep, rigid courses anymore. And so I do think this is theory, so I don't think it's proven yet. But I do think in the education world, if we just extrapolate that, I think in education, you're seeing that learning by doing is far more successful than the classroom setups. And when I see more and more of this interactive stuff start getting into the colleges right now, I think that we should be doing similar things in the corporate world.
I like this idea. It's not one I've heard before, but I can really visualizing it, with obviously chat GBT, becomes such a part of many people's roles. That's just one of them out there. It's one of the more famous ones. But I can really visualize that now, and having played with tools like this, and know I can visualize what you're saying. So, do you think, how challenging do you think that would be for a company to implement? Because that, I think would be really exciting. And I totally understand, getting to the point, to the answer that you want there rather than waiting 3 hours. I totally
Yeah,
understand. I've been through university. It's a lot of days of it. Your head's in books about stuff you don't want to learn. And then you get to that one chapter, like, this is
yeah.
what I'm interested in. So how easy or complicated do you think that would be for a company to build something like this?
Yeah, so when I think about integration, I still do think about it really in two threads. I think about the data integration, and I think that oftentimes, especially IT folks, they think about data integration first. And I also think about the user experience integration. And so one thing that's great about a lot of the digital adoption platforms that are out there is that we'll have some solution for both, but we're really talking more on the user experience side for most of it. And the user experience side is really easy to implement. It's more as if you say you're a central controller and you know the types of questions your users will ask, you will be able to go and just click the buttons on screen and show people how to use any platform for any given scenario. It won't have a tremendous impact on some of the core data challenges at the beginning of the implementation. For example, if you have multiple ERPs and You have differing data structures. There's not going to be a ton that we can do there. You're still going to have to go through those complexities and integrating those systems. We can put data validations on screen. So for example, if you're going there and the new data validation that you want to, you want the data to meet a very specific structure. So all the reports follow those structures. We can recognize that on screen and auto correct things into the structure that is needed. So those things will help the data, but it's not going to completely solve that data challenge. But I want to tell you actually an example here where you can make some of the large implementations of core systems significantly easier. And I'm going to start with one of the hardest examples where you have multiple ERPs. And this happens to a lot of our organizations that are more acquisitive in nature. They will have bought different organizations, each one's on a different ERP. And getting those to one ERP over years sometimes can take many, many dollars and lots of effort to complete. But I want to take you through the user experience side of this right now, because one of our customers is doing something really cool. I think everybody should be doing this, but they started using digital adoption in their single sign-on, which I thought was a unique place to start, because that's where all of our applications are to begin with. And they have both ERPs in this case still available to the user. And so if you just follow a normal single sign-on experience, if I need to submit time off, for example, I may not know which one to go into. But in this case, the organization built all their HR processes onto the new ERP sooner. So if somebody goes in and asks, hey, how do I submit my time off? We know to then route them to the new ERP because those processes have already been built. But if you need to go in to do something in supply chain, something that may be more complicated, I want to submit a new purchase order against one of our other budgets that haven't been moved over yet. Well, if I type that in, we recognize the process is still on the old ERP, so I can take you that way. And when we control the user and the direction of the flow, then as an organization, we can take our time, build the processes over into the new ERP. We can do it the right way. And then because we can control the direction of the user, we can take them when those processes are ready on the new platform, allowing us to decommission the old tech. And while this example is more so to decommission old tech when migrating to new tech, the same thing happens with new technology as well. So if I went in and all of a sudden I installed a new platform that performs some very specific activities, well, if we start in single sign-on, you don't need to go tell everybody exactly how to use everything. When they want to perform that action, then they can type it in and it will take you exactly to what system can perform that action. And once you're in, it can actually teach you how to perform that as well. And I think those reasons, the benefits that you give will actually reduce a lot of the complexity in how you can implement a lot of these systems, because you're controlling the user experience, which I don't think that there's a ton of great answers for. I do think that there are a lot of solutions in theory on the data side, and we're so focused on the data side. But by marrying the data challenge with the user experience challenge, now I think you have a solution that can actually reduce the complexity of implementations over time.
I love how you put that, bringing the data challenge with the user experience. I think, and that's, having a real example like this is great. I can, again, it just takes out that stress. And it's so smart how you'd be transitioning that, that update through actually leveraging both platforms and just taking out that stress and taking out all those tickets being open because this isn't working, that isn't working. Oh no, I can just ping you to all the right spots. That's really interesting. Yeah, I know our listeners will be perking up to that. That's really interesting. Something I've never heard. That's really quite interesting.
It's cool because 10 years ago, when I was building technology in this space, we weren't thinking like this at that time. It was just, hey, what new features can I build into a platform? And in many ways, I think we're feature abundant now, where 10 years ago we were feature lacking. And now it's more so, hey, we have all these features at our disposal. I'm getting lost in it. And so making it as easy as possible to take advantage of the tools that the organization has made investments is actually the challenge today in a way that it wasn't a decade ago.
And I wonder for the next question whether this kind of answers it because you mentioned the biggest challenge to adoption is it's a learning challenge. And you just presented a great example of how, we can look to get around this. And, my next question is around, how can supply chain leaders effectively balance the need for technological innovation with the risk of disrupting existing operations during the software adoption processes? Would that be, what you've just answered there, I guess, clears that up.
Yeah, yeah, I think that this is a very good way to solve the problem
Yeah.
because disruptions do happen in technology all the time. And especially for, we had the cultural question earlier. The younger generation is going to be more nimble in switching different platforms. The older generation is not going to be more nimble. And we have to provide solutions for both in order to get to eventually decommissioning old tech or implementing new ones and actually getting the ROI out of it. And some of these platforms now, because of the features, they're so expensive. So to get the ROI out of them, you have to make sure that you're really getting the adoption up. And so here, to minimize disruption, if we think about controlling the processes, and when somebody has a question or they know the task they want to do, we're pretty task driven in nature as humans. And so if we go in and say, I want to accomplish X, and as an organization, we control the journey. It really doesn't matter what they're trying to accomplish. We can get them directly to that. And the old way is when you said, hey, I want to accomplish X, we would write thousands of pages of policy documents that then you would have to go through. And that certainly was ineffective. And now we can read all those policy documents using the LLM technology and present right on screen exactly what you're supposed to do and get it into the structure that you want, following the procedures. And when you do that, those line of events actually end up you doing the action the organization wanted when they purchased the technology at the beginning. And at that point, that's when you're actually capturing the ROI of the solution. So, I think the technology at the beginning was the first thing, but then solving the data piece is the second, and then making sure it's a usable solution. Once you do all those three in nature, capturing the ROI becomes significantly easier.
And I am going to tap into the ROI piece a bit later in the episode. I'm interested to help the companies out there to really understand how they can crack and understand the true ROI of these solutions outside of the cost benefits. But just before we do that, remote work has become hugely popular. To the point where now most people expect it, and of course with remote work. This can cause challenges with software adoption, So I'm really interested is how do you feel companies can ensure consistent software adoption and utilization across, various geographical locations and organizational units when everyone, or good portion of the company is working remotely? Have you got
Yeah.
any examples or you faced this before?
Yeah, I think the remote work is actually propellant towards solutions like digital adoption platforms. Because before, when we were all in office, you could make the argument that a digital adoption platform wasn't the best setup. Maybe it is best to have everybody in a room and do collaborative learning. And then because you have 4 or 5 people in a group and you're all learning it together, you're learning from each other's mistakes. We just don't have that luxury anymore. And so instead, what a lot of people have done is rush to standing up those traditional courses. And I just don't see people taking them. And we're also very accustomed to going through the process. Maybe we make sure people take the courses, but the retention is not really there. And even if you ask a question right after they've read a bit of what comes out of the LMS, the chances they retain that when they actually need it potentially months down the line is pretty low. And so just now knowing everybody is behind a computer, everybody is separated, all of the learning needs to be interactive and immersive in nature. I think that this extends beyond digital adoption even. It's just everywhere in your business. I think about employee onboarding. You can't go and have these long courses when you don't have peers next to you to ask questions and collaborate with, or where you need your boss, sometimes you need to just go schedule 30 minutes at a time to ask a question because that's when they have their calendar blocked, not, hey, I can just stop over when your door is open, or I catch you on the way walking to coffee to ask the 30-second question that I needed. And so that's really the environment we need to replicate, is that 30-second question that people need to ask to get unstuck. Because once you get unstuck and back on your way, I think that we are inquisitive enough to solve our own problems, but allow people to ask questions, answer them as fast as we can, and get them back on their way. That concept is something that we need to master in all of our areas of the business if we're going to really achieve the benefits of remote work that I think we can.
No, I really hear you, and that consistent theme of your answers is just becoming, much more effective mentors and teachers in our companies. Something that we really need to take seriously. And yeah, I think these are some really interesting approaches to this. And moving towards the ROI piece that you mentioned a couple minutes ago, what would you say are some of the key metrics or indicators that supply chain leaders should monitor to gauge the effectiveness of the ROI of the software adoption beyond traditional measures such as cost savings and efficiency gains?
Yeah, to me, that this is a sequential line of questions. And certainly when I'm building technology, I ask these questions to myself, because the number one thing that I want more than anything else is to make sure that our customers are getting value out of the platform. If they're getting value out of the platform, they will stay with us forever. They'll help us innovate. They'll tell us their biggest challenges, and we love to solve those challenges. And the first metric for me is always, are the users logging in? Do we have enough people that are actually getting in and using the platform, or let's even just say trying to use the platform at this point? And so that is the first barrier, because you'd be surprised at how many organizations we go to where they spent a lot of money on a specific piece of tech. We go in and we analyze it, and no one is logging in. And so any of the change behavior things that you want to do behind that doesn't matter if you first don't have the audiences in the platform. And so in order to do that, we need to do things like, make it available in your single sign-on. You need to do some education in the organization. Certainly we have an answer to that, and having that AI assistant where you can just ask the question and bring you into the platform. But if you don't have that problem answered, everything beyond it doesn't matter. Once you have the user in the platform, then it's, how are they using it? Are they using it for the intended purposes? You may have bought a platform as an organization to address 5 critical strategies that you're trying to deploy. Well, are they actually using it in line with that? Now, I'll use a very simple example here. We often will see a platform like ZoomInfo be deployed in a way that it's more marketing, doing research, and then eventually having salespeople reach out. If that's what you bought it for, great. But then if somebody comes in and is using it other ways, and here sometimes we'll actually see ZoomInfo data being used to update data records in an ERP that will go to supply chain. Different use case, you already paid for it. It's nice that you have found a different way to use it. When you see those other use cases, you need to then educate other people around it to then get more usage, right? Just because you bought a platform, you may find that there are other use cases that come out of it. And then once you find the common use cases, are they using it in a way that fits your policy? And I deliberately use ZoomInfo here as an example because there's some real GDPR concerns, right? And so you may have done that and may have solved your problem, but because our policies would actually prevent that from happening, we may want to stop that. And so, but you need to follow the lines in order. And then once you get to the end and you have your policies, and making sure that the procedures that are being followed in the platform are adhering to the policies we actually have, then you get that kind of the golden ticket at the end, where you're going to capture whatever you're trying to capture if you solve those three. And so I personally find that if we're trying to get to the end point, we want to read all your policy documents using an LLM. We then want to then show you on screen how to use it. Getting into the platform, we tried that single sign-on example is a really good one. But there are lots of different ways to solve those three components, but you have to solve those three components if you're going to capture the KPIs and the value levers that you want to at the end. And we actually have in our organization, we go through every platform. We know that the common value levers that are trying to be solved when implementing this technology. And then we try to make sure that we're measuring against those as well. So first you kind of start with those adoption metrics. But if you're buying, say, a reverse auctioning solution, well, how many reverse auctions are you going through? What was the starting cost and where you got it to? And if you ran X more auctions, how much would you save? That's a very savings-based use case. I personally think that we're moving a little bit away from pure savings-based use cases, which I think is great. I believe that things like supply chain risk and supply chain continuity, especially with some of the geopolitical risk around the world right now, is more important to making sure that you have a sustainable business no matter what happens. But if that's no matter what the end KPIs you're looking for, if you get the three user behaviors leading up to the event, you'll get the result that you want.
I like that you broke these down, and I just want to go through them for our viewers. So there's one you say the engagement, from just tracking, the login, if it is a platform that you can log in, or any other engagement metrics to understand, especially if these guys are working remotely, are they engaging in this new solution? Then another one you mentioned was about not just the engagement, but also I think I'd missed it. Actually, if you
Yeah.
could give me the other two, so then I can be clear on them for the audience.
Yeah. So the second one are just the use cases, how people are using the platform.
Yeah. And does it ma
It-
if it matches our policy?
yeah. Yeah. The
Yeah.
third one is matching the policy, because
Yeah.
you will see more use cases come up, which is good. And
Mm.
most of the time, they'll be okay in your policies, or you'll have to tighten a policy. There will be some that people are using the platform like, I really don't want you to use it that way, and you'll have to block
Yeah.
that. Either way, it's good for you to know. But yes, first engagement, two, then once they're in there, how are they using it? And then three, is it in line with the policies that you have?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's really good to just take that as a takeaway. It gives you good insight on, how to not just approach the adoption, but see the ROI outside of the cost savings and efficiency gain. So that's a really interesting takeaway for our audience there. And I want to ask a question on the solution side. We've done a lot of questions for, the consumers of these softwares. But I want to understand, what can the solution providers do? So, I'm gonna say three things, but it's okay if you have four or five, or maybe just one. But,
Okay.
I thought I'd round it off on three. Is what would you say are the key three things that solution providers can do better today to improve the adoption of technology and innovation as a whole?
Yeah, a couple of them are really obvious to me, because there are players that do this really well, and there are players that do this really poorly. And if I look outside of our space, sometimes the answers become clear. Um, by nature of supply chain, I feel like we've had investment come to our area a little bit later than some of the other areas of the business have gotten. Um, and some of these challenges have actually been solved in other areas. So, we can kind of check our answers here against what have worked for other lines of business. But the first and foremost is that the technology providers need to make the solutions easier to integrate. And it's probably pretty obvious to some of the listeners here, but when you think about making your platform as sticky as possible, there are two lines of thought. There's the line of thought where once I have you on my platform, I need to make it as hard as possible for other things to get into my environment so I can sell my own things to you. I won't name the players, but I think that some of them are pretty obvious. And I'll use an example here of like, the old iPhones where you had to have the new charger that they have that no one else has. And even if you bought it from a different manufacturer, that then it would break way sooner. They're doing those things deliberately to make more money. And I think that we're at this point now where we really need to make sure that that doesn't happen, that we make sure that there's kind of interconnective ways to make sure that solutions that allow our customers even to buy the solutions that really drive their business forward. There is so much functionality available to all of our buyers in this space right now. And really you should be choosing the technology that has the functionality that fits your business, not somebody putting a power play out front. So that would be the first one. And there are some players that do that really well, by the way. Two, I think that there is some ability to help cure the data problem. So, an answer that doesn't work for me, and I think it's a pretty obvious one, is everyone standing up their own supplier portal. Every technology player in the space for a while was saying, oh, I have a data problem. Your suppliers will come in here and input their data and then it will work. They don't. And so if your platform, if the linchpin of that is that you're going to ask every one of the suppliers to come in and update their data on whatever frequency you need and whatever level of data you need, I think that is a recipe for failure. And so tying into something where you can proactively get that data, whether you're using an LLM, whether you're using a data foundation, whether you're using even Dun & Bradstreet, right? I still think that's a better example or a better solution rather than going and standing up a supplier portal to gather all this information. And then the third, which really is my space, right, is that we need to make the platforms interconnective. We need to be able to make sure that when you perform a task in one, we make it as user-friendly as possible. And then that same action can be brought into another platform. Because the functionality of each system is getting deeper in different areas, the reality is we're not going to have one platform go and solve everything. And so you need to make it usable cross-platform. You need to be able to grab data from one screen and maybe put it onto another screen. Those are all things I think you need an overlay type solution for. And you see a lot of providers right now actually taking what we do, a digital adoption platform, and pre-installing it for their users because they know it makes it so much more effective. And in fact, for our side, over half of our business so far this year has actually come from solution providers that are pre-installing this for their customers because they know it just makes the platform so much more usable. Now it still confines you just to that platform if you do that. So, I definitely like the enterprise route because to make it truly effective, you want it to be across all your different platforms. But it's a start, right? We need to make platforms as user-friendly as possible. People need to be able to get in, do what they want, and get out as fast as possible. If you do that, then you've designed a very effective solution.
I I like that. Get in and get out quick. Everyone's getting busier and busier through life, and we're expecting everything to be much more efficient. And we get stressed so easy now if especially with technology, if it doesn't work, even if my laptop, has a bad day, you lose your mind with it. So it's interesting that that's sort of the consistent theme. We need to improve the way we teach that we within organizations and really at the core of that, you're saying it's the speed and efficiency in giving them that information. And the same here, that's the efficiency of the UI. And I might just add one final question is what would you say for the solution providers is maybe at the core of that, of why they're not doing that right now? The three points that you mentioned. You mentioned with Apple, that was, I faced that problem. You will have faced that problem. We all have, the Apple users. Would you say it's, solely a monetary problem, or would you say there's something more at the core, maybe not really truly understanding, how these softwares should be built? What would you say is maybe at the core of it?
Yeah, I would group these problems really into two different levels based on the size of the organization. So, if we take the really large providers that are established in this space, I do think it is a little bit more of a monetary game. And I read these business cases all the time, and even from the VC community, where I'll go and I'll give some advice on whether things are good investments or not. And I see these things in the business plan, right? So I don't think people should be thinking about designing solutions that way. I think it is a recipe to fail in the long run. And I traditionally I try to build things for the long run versus the short run. So the big players, they could make it easier. Some choose not to deliberately, some choose to make it easier. And so if I were buying some of the larger platforms today, the ones trying to make the data challenge as easy as possible, trying to make it easy as possible for you to integrate other solutions, and trying to increase the user experience. If you're doing those three things, I can believe in the continual innovation that you will have. Now I want to switch tune, and I want to go to the startups, or let's say organizations that have less than 50 million in revenue. I think in that case, it may be more so that they've rushed so much to feature functionality on specific use cases that we didn't really think about the dependencies that lead up to it. And I've been guilty of this. So it's one of the reasons that I'm bringing it up, because you think about oftentimes when we're building new solutions, we have great sponsors that we have built relationships with, that we're actually designing these solutions for. And we think about the end point first, but we don't always necessarily think of the things that will get in the way. We just think, hey, let's get there, and we'll keep solving each challenge as they come up. And there are some consistent challenges that get there, that get in the way rather. And the big guys can help solve this for the small guys. And I'll go to Apple, for example. If you're an app, there are thousands of great apps now in the App Store. And the App Store makes it easy to solve some of the data challenges, the integration challenges, even some of the user experience challenges, right? So they have done that specific component really well, and it's made it easier for the small guys to put together a point solution that will make the iPhone more user-friendly for you. And so those big guys that have a platform type experience will make it easier on the startups. But if you're a startup and you can't play within the larger platform environment, I do think it puts a burden on the customer. And it puts a burden on the customer because they want your solution. You're designing the solution for them. There's a lot of really great innovation that comes through startups. But if you're not bringing it into the overarching ecosystem, that's where it becomes a challenge. And to solve that, I do think there's either the big platform play, like what we're talking about here, or it can be solved through a digital adoption platform where you're kind of doing a screen interfacing and maybe copying things on screen and then putting it into the other applications that you need proactively. So there are two different ways that can solve there. And the reality is you can also do both. It doesn't have to be either or. But depending on whether you're a large organization or a small organization, you're going to get a different answer to that question.
No, I enjoyed you clearing that up. I think it's eye-opening for, companies that are currently looking for new software at the moment. It gives you good insight into the different size companies and really where the problem lies. So I think that gives our audience a really good insight now into both what they could be doing, and also, they have more insight into who they're actually going to be working with. So we really like to finish off with a thumbs up, thumbs down segment. It's a fun segment. They're yes or no questions. So I will ask you a question, and all you give us is a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And if you could also say thumbs up or thumbs down for our audio listeners, that would be great.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay. Uh, do supply chain organizations often overlook user experience design when implementing software?
Thumbs up.
Have you seen supply chain software adoption fail due to insufficient integration with existing systems?
Thumbs up.
Do supply chain software vendors adequately address industry-specific regulatory challenges?
Thumbs up.
See, some of these can be difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you encountered supply chain software adoption, which has been hindered by a disconnect between headquarters and local operations?
Thumbs up.
Do supply chain organizations often underestimate the time and resource needed for software adoption?
Thumbs down.
Interesting. Interesting. Have you ever felt you were living the reality of the movie Groundhog Day with a software implementation?
Thumbs up.
Yeah. I appreciate your honesty. I
You know,
ah, yeah.
some really cool questions in there, and I had some hesitation on some, more so because I see the potential that's coming. And I know it's coming. And in fact, in some areas, I think it's already here. And one of the bigger challenges now, I feel, is that some of these solutions can be solved significantly faster than what organizations even know. But they've gone through many years of failure because things like LLMs weren't available yet, because things like digital adoption platforms weren't available yet. And you mixing those things together is making the implementation so much more successful and reducing the costs significantly. If you would have asked me that some of those same questions 5 years ago, I think it would have been thumbs up across the board. But I'm personally very excited about some of the technologies that are coming, and I still think we're just at the tip of the spear. I think it's going to really come quickly here over the next several years.
Well, you're firing me up about this, and I know our audience is going to be getting, really excited about this to hear it from you. And, we got a lot of intelligence today, and I know the audience is going to enjoy this one. So I do want the audience to know if they have any questions. Where can our audience find you, Matt?
So you can find me at apty.io, and my email address is matt.palackdharry, which is on screen here, at apty.io.
Wonderful. Yeah. So please do contact if you're looking for, I'm sure that there are many more questions. So yeah, thank you so much, Matt. We'll just give a little wave to the camera together and just say goodbye to everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Hi, my name is Scott Mears, and I'm one of the hosts of the Supply Chain Tech podcast with Roamby. On this podcast, we talk to supply chain heroes from around the world about everything, ranging from the disruptions related to supply chains, their personal experiences with tracking technologies, strategies to build resilience, and much, much more. We already have some recommended videos for you to the side of me, and if any of this sounds interesting to you, do subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss another Roamby video. I'll see you next time.